as you approach the things of God that he asks you to do, things like love, are you a choo-choo or a water walker? Are you a choo-choo or a water walker? So, well, there's an interesting question. Nobody asked you that one before. Well, here in my little toy box, one of the things I rated out was a choo-choo. Now, here's a question for you. As I hold up a toy choo-choo, man, there is just no problem finding a toy choo-choo around little engines like this. And now, a little child's toy. So if I were to ask you, what is the first story that comes to mind when I bring out a little train engine? What story comes to mind? You know, yeah, in the first, I didn't even get to ask. I got this far. When I bring out a little engine, and Debbie goes, that could. So I didn't even get to ask, and she already had it. And we all know that story is so popular. A little bit of trivia on this story, kind of interesting. Did you know it was embroiled in a big legal battle? Even for a child, oh, it's such a wonderful story. How this happened was, it was first published in 1930, and it was so popular as a story that it really became the bread and butter of that publishing company's business. Someone discovering the story said, you know, my cousin wrote that, and the story was originally written in 1902, or around thereabouts, and the fellow who wrote it never published it. It was actually in a series of letters for an after-school program that they were running, and it was, at that time, the story was actually called The Little Pony Engine, I think was the name of it, and you might know it by that name too, because it ended up getting published by both names, The Little Pony Engine. My understanding would be kind of like we do kids camp and stuff. We write the curriculum for it. It doesn't get published anywhere. It's used specifically for the program, kind of that thing. So the story got published in both ways. Now, why was it so popular? Because even to today, well, you know, we know it as a motivational parable, really. What was it about? This little train that seemed too small to pull off the job pulls this a heavy load that needs to get across this daunting hill to the next village. This little engine does it, and let's try this out. And what does it say as it's going up the hill? Amazing, isn't it? You're a whole room of adults and everybody can, no problem. If I were to ask you to recite something from Chaucer, you would, what? But the choo-choo, you know. We know it. And it's a wonderful story celebrating human will. Human willpower is really, isn't it, what it's all about? This little train, I think I can, and just in effort, it gets over that hill. Wonderful story. We need to try, and kids need to know to try. But you know what? There's some flaws in it a little bit here in humanistic thinking, and this is that it crosses a hill, but Tom Holliday in the book points out, you know what? Life isn't just a hill, it's a series of hills. And you may, I think I can, and under your own steam, get up over that first hill and that second and that third. But we know inevitably somewhere down the line you hit a hill that you cannot think I can your way over. You cannot do it through your own power. And this is especially true as Christians because God asks a lot of impossible things. And there are some hills that simply are beyond our human will. So I think I can is wonderful, but when we try and live our Christian life through our own steam, take, for instance, we're talking about love. Love is hard. Sometimes love is impossible, humanly speaking. And then what? And then what? Somewhere, if we're under our own steam, we're going to run into problems because we are limited. Even as wonderful as human will in itself can be, it's not everything. Now, the water walker story is a little bit different. This is hard to find toys on this one, because unless you're specialized toys. So as I raided the nursery, I had to dig to the bottom of the box. You know, I had all this stuff. I put it aside on my desk, and Brenda said, I came in and saw the toys on your desk, and I thought, well, I'm not sure if he's done playing, so I'll leave them there. So anyway, luckily she didn't take them back. But when I dug in there, since I couldn't, you know, the nativity scene is a nice story, popular, so you can find toys for that. So I got a Lego shepherd, but he's going to have to pass for Peter. and they did nicely have kind of like a little wave. So here's a little Sea of Galilee, just a little tiny Sea of Galilee. You probably know where I'm going. I'm going to Matthew chapter 14. And it's quite a story that's going on here. Jesus has done his thing. He's off on his own. Meet me on the other side of the lake. Off the gang goes in what is probably a 26-foot boat. And they're rowing away. Sea of Galilee, where the sea is, it's known there's mountains around. It's kind of a basin. The air will pile in around there. When they have a storm, they really have a storm. So here they are. They head out across this sea, which is really a giant lake, and they're heading across there, and the storm hits. Man, ever been out in the middle of nowhere on water when you get hit with a storm? It's something. And so there they are. It's amazing what you can find out now in the era of computers. I wonder how big the waves were, because they talk about waves. Sure enough, I Google, what's the average wave in a storm on the Sea of Galilee? 10 feet. So here they are. I don't know if you've ever been hit by a 10-foot wave. It's kind of interesting. I did a silly thing living on the coast one time. We went down on a dock when the ocean was in a storm, and the waves were probably around 10 feet. And if you can imagine, take 3 or 4, maybe a hot tub of water, you know, that size. Imagine standing somewhere and somebody being able to go like this with a hot tub of water, only cold water. That's about the force. It is amazing, the force of a wave like that. So here they are. They couldn't fight the waves. They're hopeless. Anybody here see The Perfect Storm? Ever see that show? Yeah, man, no, somebody didn't see. Yeah, you see those waves. And they were going down. The perfect storm was happening to the apostles. They were going to be going down. Somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, some dude comes walking across the water. Well, that must be a ghost, because people can't walk on water. Well, sure enough, he gets close enough, and it's, guess who? It's Jesus walking on the water. Peter gets excited. Impulsive guy, right? He does it. Hey, I want some of that. Hey, Jesus, he's smart enough to say this. Bid me that I come out to you on the water. I'm not going until you ask, but if you ask, then I'll go. So yeah, come on out. Now keep in mind, we're not talking glassy water. We're talking 10-foot hot tub waters of waves, angry waves. Peter gets out there, and then the most amazing thing happens. Peter is the only mortal man that we know of, only human being who's simply a human being to walk on water. For a few seconds, Peter gets it right. He's out there and he takes 1 step, 2, we're not sure how many, but he does it. How does he do it? Because it's not his will. His will is entirely used to connect with Christ and his will. His will is the focus, face on, nose to nose with Christ, looking him in the eye, walking on the water. And then off he goes. And somewhere along this little walk, somewhere after the first few seconds, he realizes, hey, you know what? People can't walk on water. That's not possible. 10-foot waves are kind of miserable looking. They're vicious. And the whole thing is broken. The will thing is broken. He then turns from a water walker to a choo-choo. He starts going under his own steam. And we all know what happens then. Luckily, Jesus is there. Save me. Why did you doubt? You were doing it. Why did you doubt? But there we are. That's all of us. Jesus asked Peter to do something impossible. Come out here, walk on the water. People can't do that. Well, no, but God can. Filled with God, filled with His will, connected with God's will. He's doing the impossible. And that's what it's all about. And as we approach the whole idea of relationship and love, the whole idea of God telling you to do something impossible, you're either a choo-choo or you're a water walker. And sometimes I'm afraid we're a bit of both. But man, when we get it right, and we're on that water. See, here's the second great principle. A new command, but not a new command. It's this: love others. That's hard enough. As Jesus loves you. Impossible. What human being on the face of the planet can love like God Himself? It is simply not possible. But John 13:34, that's exactly what we're told to do. And we know it's not a new command in the way that we already covered this last week. Over 300 times love mentioned in the Old Testament. Now the love of the New Testament is starting to show up. Love, yeah, very, very hard. Love as I love you, says God. Impossible. Impossible. But for a few seconds, Peter gets it right. We can get it right. But what does it look like when we get it right? When we're not the choo-choo and we're the water walker. What does it look like? 1 Corinthians 13, you'll find the whole series will go back to this chapter because this is the one place it's extremely concise. You want to know what love is these things. And it starts right there in verse 4 in the descriptions. Love is patient. Love is kind. Now, the first important word there is the word is. See, love isn't just featured by those. Love is those things. It is those things. That means love is equated to patience and kindness. Is that if you're in a situation, in a relationship where patience is required and it's not there, then there is no love, according to God. If you're in a situation that requires kindness and your kindness is not there, then according to God, then there is no love. Love is patient, love is kind. Two words that just blow us away right from the beginning. So what are these things? What are these things? Well, guess what? In my love, I wasn't done rating the toy box yet. I managed to say, you know what? In love, I'm going to steal another toy. And so I got this one. And Barb Schultz is in the back of the first service, and I kind of got a kick. This looks a little like her car, only she's got the stripes, the muscle car. I said, I must be a loving person. I look like that car. Well, how does the car fit in? This is, if you think of what a car is, we call it a vehicle, don't we? It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle that carries you down the highways of life physically. This is, you don't have to walk to Danville anymore. Your car will take you there, and we all know that. Well, love is a vehicle too. It's the vehicle of relationships. Life. The highways of life are also relationships. They're journeys. They're relationships. Love is the vehicle that takes you down that highway of relationships. So just starting there with an analogy, just think how that works with cars. Sometimes you may be like me. I come in my 97 Escort to church on Sundays because I wouldn't trust it to go any further than this building. But it's kind of a clunker. And, I won't put much money in that car because, it's a clunker. And so it's not all that well maintained. Unfortunately, that's the way people can get with their relationships. Even their long-time relationships, they're kind of clunkers. They're poorly maintained. There's not much keeping them going. Not surprising, clunkers break down on highways. That's what they do. Not surprising that we see the failing in relationships we do when people are driving poorly maintained clunkers. Other people are kind of like Barb, and they have sporty cars. Now, luckily, Barb is a responsible driver. But, the whole idea of really driving a muscle car, it turns heads. It's flashy. It's something that's meant to drive just within the bounds of control. It's fast. It's spectacular. You get passed by something on the Autobahn going 3 times your speed. Spectacular, fast vehicles, fast and furious. However, when they crash, they're spectacular too. The crashes can be really, really, people usually don't survive them. And some relationships are like that, just barely in control, just hot and heavy, going fast, barely in control. And when they crash, they're spectacular. If the kids would have had a minivan, I might have brought one of those in. Some relationships are like minivans, or like utility vehicles. They're comfortable, they're convenient. Unfortunately, marriages can even go in that direction. As you know, after 30 or 40 years, it's just as comfortable and convenient. But you know what? In love relationships, for God's vehicle of love, it's a balance of all these things. It does have some flash to it. There are people who have remained married for a long time, and it's not just a utility vehicle. It's got some flesh, but yet it's stable. It's in control. It's not going to break down on you, because God is perfect, and so is his vehicle of love. Okay, if love is a vehicle, and let's build on that analogy a little bit. If love is this vehicle, then patience is the brakes. Patience is a brake. How so? Well, you think even if you're driving your muscle car down the road, if you're driving in the county roads around Indiana, you better know how to use your brakes, because there's a lot of unexpected turns that go on, fields and all kinds of things. Sometimes the fastest way to get somewhere is to slow down. That way you stay in control and you actually make it to where you're going. Same thing in relationships as we look at them in love. Patience is that slowing down so you make the right response type of thing. As Holiday, I like the way he classifies it that way, that in a way, patience can be seen as a strategic inaction. A strategic inaction. How so? It keeps you slowing down enough so, you know what, in that relationship, when that person says that thing that ticks you off, you slow down enough not to say the wrong thing, your first impulse. Slow down enough that when you're discouraged in whatever it is you're doing, you don't just impulsively throw in the towel and quit. It's slowing down. It's strategic brake system for your relationship. Here's a great secret of patience, Romans 2:7. Now, in this, in the first service asked, and you probably said the same thing, a very no-brainer question, what's the opposite of patience? What would you say? Impatience. See, everybody says, it's a trap, I'm not going to say anything. Yeah, I would too. But God goes a little deeper, and the answer's not quite what you expect. Romans 2:7, Paul's writing a letter to the Roman church, and he's setting up a statement, but right in here is the truth we're looking for. Verse 7, eternal life to those who, by patient continuous in doing good, seek for glory, honor, and immortality. Patient continuance in doing good. But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath, tends to go with that. See, according to God's word, the opposite of patience is really self-seeking. Self-seeking. Kind of interesting when we get dealing with this idea of self. I can't just say selfishness, because that doesn't really encapsulate all of this. There are times you are absorbed in yourself or focused on yourself. You're not really being selfish, but you're definitely locked inside your own self. And when we are that way, there's a bad thing that happens. There's a restrictive thing when we are locked into self. We can't see beyond self. And if you can't see beyond self, there's two great powers that you no longer have. You cannot see through the eyes of God, and you cannot see through the eyes of other people. Both of them carry amazing powers dealing with love. If you look through God's eyes, one, and see yourself. When I thought about this, and I thought of, as I look through God's eyes and even see myself, the conclusion was this: as human beings, we are precious, but we're not pretty. We are precious, but we're not pretty. What do you mean by that? We are precious in this, that God so loved the world, he so loved you, that even he gave his son to die for you, to redeem you and me. God so loves you and I that he created us on purpose for a purpose. God loves you so much that he wants to spend an eternity with you in relationship. That's a whole lot of precious, considering who God is, but not pretty. I could say that of anyone in here. I could say that of myself, say, maybe I'm not a bad guy, but if you were to ask me the wrong question before my first cup of coffee, it's not pretty, Somebody presses that button that you have, and it's guaranteed to send you off. It's not pretty. We all have a side that is not pretty. We might be pretty physically. We might be pretty in the way we're precious to God, but in our imperfections, we're not pretty. When we get locked up with self, we are not pretty. We are not pretty. Patience is this thing that takes us beyond that. When we can see first through God's eyes, you see who you are and you gain perspective. You won't beat yourself into the ground, but you won't get full of yourself either. You are precious and valuable, not in your own sake, but for the one who created you. So you gain perspective there. You gain perspective of the world you looked at, because if that's true of you, it's true of everyone else you look at as well. They are human beings. Whether it is the man in the gutter or the king on the throne, they are human beings. They are precious for the same reason. And you expect them to maybe be not all that pretty. And you give them a little latitude because you're not all that pretty either if you push the wrong buttons. You gain perspective when you can see through the eyes of other people. It'll change your perspective of who they are. I'll give you an example on that for me. We've had Pastor Tim come here. Tim McNamee from City View has come and done. We've gone down, done Sioux for Souls. Amazing pastor, amazing ministry. This is my confession. You know what? When the first time I met him, it was at a pastor's conference. I didn't really trust old Tim. You know why? Because when you talk to Tim, he never really looked you in the eye. Don't know, it's just this thing, I don't know if I trust somebody who just won't look me in the eye, And then I'm talking to another pastor, and it just incidentally says, by the way, did you know that Pastor Tim is clinically blind? And then all of a sudden it changed. Now I was seeing in a very figurative way through his eyes. I understood something about him I didn't know. I was in his shoes in a way I wasn't before, and now I had all kinds of latitude for that particular action. Now I wasn't, if you want to say, impatient when he didn't look me in the eye. You see, being selfless or getting beyond oneself lets you get in someone else's shoes. Think for yourself even. How many people, or who may you not have known in your life that you thought, man, that person is really too sensitive, or that person really gets angry too quickly, and then you find out a story or get a little background on that person. You go, oh, now I understand. That abuse as a child, that wound that they're suffering with and trying to get over. Oh, okay, now I understand. Now I understand. It's patience that allows that, because you go beyond self. You see in others. You're not so quick to judge. You stop, you slow down, you get perspective. You think before you respond, and you stay in control. Patience is an incredible power. It's a power of godly love. And it's an impossible thing without him. And it's the brake system of that car. Then we move on to kindness. If the brakes are strategic inaction, then kindness is really strategic action. So for my analogy, I see it as the tires of the car. And it's not the engine, it's the tires. It's the thing that keeps it rolling. How does kindness work? Well, in this action, let me illustrate in a little story. And background on the story as I tell it is that for Kathy and I, our big talk time is driving somewhere. And there we were driving back from Danville or something, and we got into a rambling conversation, which was lots of fun. Somehow we ended up on the awkwardness of adolescence when we were young. And so I went back to Kathy and I said, tell me the details of that story again. And she said, yeah, okay, you can share it. So, but I get to share it in my way. I can say anything now. She's already gone for the day. Kathy, for a start, she was always beautiful. I know because I've seen pictures of every age. She was always a beautiful person, but she was painfully shy when she was young. So the worst thing that can happen to a young teenager, when she was going into the 7th grade, her friends were mainly a year behind, so she was going to another school, didn't know a soul, painfully shy. Well, you can guess that's kind of a really hard situation. So what do you do if you're painfully shy in a new school? You stay under the radar. You just don't make waves. You just, hey, I'm not here. Forget, But here's Kathy. And then the girl that sat in front of her in most of her classes was a girl named Cynthia. Now, Cynthia, we've all had a Cynthia we've known somewhere through school. Just didn't quite fit in. She was, looked like, Kathy said, long, looked like it'd be beautiful hair, but it was always stringy. And it looked like, physically she was forming very nicely as a young lady. However, she was in dresses that would look homemade from the 50s. 7th grade. Worst of all, adolescence kicks in. We all know that, let's get to the nitty-gritty. Things start working like sweat glands and stuff that didn't work before. People start struggling with body odor, all of these things. And unfortunately for Cynthia, that was a big problem for her. And I don't know what her home life was, but somehow she hadn't discovered the whole thing of deodorant yet. And so, worst of all, the body odor thing going on. So Kathy here, shy, painfully, trying not to make waves, has this going on in front of her. Kathy was not always very pretty, but she was also very compassionate, very tender-hearted. So she sat there and had compassion for this girl because you can guess how this would go, the mean whispers going on. Targeted, you're different, you're smelly, you can guess what went on in the girl, herself being shy, just not able to stand up for herself. Very tragic. Going on literally in front of her all year as this goes on. Kathy felt so bad for her. But you know what? According to God's definition at this point, Kathy was compassionate, but she was not kind. She was compassionate, but not yet kind. The year goes on. What can I do and still not make waves? She's thinking. So as best as a 7th grader can, she decides to write a letter. And she's thinking this young lady doesn't seem to get why she's being targeted. So as nicely as she can, she said, Kathy, and I said, yeah, I'd both love to see that letter now, how diplomatic and tender you were at that age in writing this letter. As she remembers it as an adult, what she did was write, you may have, I know I feel bad for this targeting, this picking on that's going on, but here's maybe why. And what you can do. And she mentioned, especially with the body odor thing, and then said, I have all kinds of items at home. I'd be happy to give some if you can't find the right stuff or whatever. So she did as well as she could. Kathy herself is still painfully shy, so she folds up this letter. The last day, heading out for spring break, just wordlessly slips that quickly into her hand and just keeps going. Well, after spring break, she said, well, I'd like to think it was me. I don't know, because we're both shy. Nothing was ever said. But all of a sudden, there was no more body odor. Things were just cleaned up. Cynthia kind of reinvented herself a little bit. Loved to think it was that letter. Point of it is this, is kindness started when that letter was passed, when there was action taken. That's what made the impact. See, if patience is loving in inaction, kindness doesn't become kindness until it is in action. In action. Kindness is when you are moved enough that you do something for the welfare of that other person. Kindness. Love is patient, but love is kind. Interesting, even in Scripture, I wouldn't give you the Greek name because it's like 9 syllables long, but the meaning of it is basically, if you were to look it up, it's to show one, this is the literal word for word how they define it, according to the Greek, to show oneself useful, i.e. act benevolently. act benevolently. It is when we act benevolently then we are kind. Then we are kind. Love is patient, but love is kind. We may not be quite as loving as we really think we are. And you won't be, and I won't be, as long as I'm a choo-choo. I won't be. Until I learn to walk on water. Until I learn that. God told us, a new command I give you, love. Well, that's tough. As I loved you, that's impossible. There's only one way. There's only one way.